Good evening. This is Maestro Cortello with a Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite modcast. Today we have a 1v1 on Calderis Refinery. Our first player today is Destoffel. Destoffel is playing as the Tyrant Lictor Alpha. The Lictor Alpha is an infiltrating melee hero, a very, very powerful 1v1 hero, arguably the best in the game. Some people definitely will argue that. Either way, he's definitely a top-tier 1v1 hero. His opponent is GUG. That's that name that's tough. That I don't know the characters, but I've been told that it says Razberg. And he seems to pretty much be a dedicated Techmarine player. He's playing as the Techmarine, taxicab colors. The Techmarine is a ranged hero to start out, but you can now get an axe with him in the Elite mod. And he is very good at supporting vehicles. That's pretty much one of his things. He's better at supporting vehicles than pretty much any other hero in the game. He can also be very, very effective and or annoying with relay beacons and turrets, which can be very, very powerful. So I just got done casting some crazy 3v3s, and now I'm taking a slightly relaxing break by watching this slower, more strategic 1v1 game. But I love casting 1v1s. There's a little bit of discussion about Techmarines that kind of resulted in an argument on game replays, but one of the things about the Techmarine is that his opening is a very, very high range DPS opening. And what's high about the range DPS opening is not necessarily the range DPS of the individual units, but the fact that this is an opening where every single unit is a ranged unit. The Techmarine is a ranged unit, and all of his squads right now are ranged units. And that's really, really quite exceptional compared to most other races or heroes in the game. Usually, first of all, Space Marines are, along with the Imperial Guard and perhaps also Grey Knights, a race where both of their starting units, both of their power-free units, are ranged units. For most other races, their starting units are one ranged unit and one melee unit. That's how it is for Chaos, Orcs, Eldar, and Tyranids. So Space Marines generally have more ranged DPS coming out of their opening builds, just because so many of their starting units are ranged units. And that's especially true for the Techmarine, who starts out with a bolter and starts out with the highest range DPS of a hero in the game. So you just get a lot of range DPS coming out of the Techmarine early on. And part of what that means is that it can actually be very, very tough to use a melee unit effectively against the Techmarine. Even if you don't get shotgun scouts, you just have so much range fire that you can really melt a just melt a melee unit on approach with all the focus fire from so many different ranged squads. That is I'd say one of the relatively unique advantages of the Techmarine. There are certainly other high range DPS options as far as heroes and units go, but the Techmarine is definitely one of his special strengths. It also means that the Techmarine is a hero who is not going to have trouble finding range damage to focus fire down a hero. So focus firing a melee hero is definitely not going to be one of the Techmarine's weaknesses. Lictor Alpha right here, a little low on health. Will he actually go down and retreat? It looks like he's really, really gunning for it. And he actually does manage to take the Lictor Alpha down and retreat. So very, very nice play. Actually chasing down with range fire. Now, I just talked a lot about what the advantages are of this Techmarine build, or just the Techmarine in general. Let's actually now talk about the opposite side of that, the disadvantage. When you have all ranged fire, that means, of course, means you don't have much melee. So the Techmarine is going to be probably one of the worst heroes in the game for getting retreat kills and squad kills early on, because he really doesn't have any melee, doesn't really have much melee. And Razberg chose to get a triple scout build, and this is something I actually tried it a bit recently, and I like it. I like it. I like it against certain races and certain heroes, because you get a lot of mobile range firepower. You can keep two squads in for fighting, or even have two squads for map control. Either one can be very, very powerful. And of course, you do get a lot of flexibility with grenades, shotguns, etc. Techmarine right here. I was going to say, well, I wanted to see what upgrades he has. He has Bionics, which is really, really nice. So that really is going to combine. Well, these Tyranids have gotten into melee range, but Bionics can be such a powerful melee counter ability, especially against a squad like Hormigons that do not yet have the adrenal, the buff from the melee synapse from the warriors. Razberg nevertheless lost that early lost that last engagement, and he is getting his power bashed. But at the same time, I don't know how much of this power is actually going to go down. So far, none of the generators have been destroyed. It looks like he will get some to go down. Now, one of the things that happens though is that all of these units are getting a bit of a damage resistance from being in melee. When you get into melee, you actually have a damage resistance, and it looks like Destoffel actually does manage to take out two generators, even going for a third. And he's also using this advantage of pressing forward so much to actually secure most of the map. And I guess I said that he should not have, the Techmarine should not have too much trouble with all this melee, and actually now he does seem to be struggling a little bit. But he's certainly not lacking in focus fire. I guess part of the problem is that he once a shotgun is on cooldown, then there's actually none of these units can individually beat a lot of the melee units. Particularly the Lictor Alpha has gotten the feeder tendrils. I'm tempted. It is kind of a go-to upgrade. It's just incredibly powerful. I think sometimes some Lictor Alpha players may actually choose to get something else, but it is such an incredibly powerful weapon. To get 63.7 DPS power melee and 2% healing per strike on a weapon that attacks so quickly is just incredibly powerful. Probably one of the best hero weapons in the game, especially for when you can get it. You can get it in Tier 1, and it can be very, very tough to counter in Tier 1, and on an infiltrating hero of all things. This is also a matchup. Traditionally, any Space Marine hero has been considered not basically unfavored against Tyranid heroes, and generally, I mean, the Lictor Alpha is kind of the Tyranid hero in 1v1. So now that is, of course, something that may have changed over time, but there are certainly some things that can still be tough about this matchup. But right now, Razberg is doing okay. He is behind in tech, in part because he has gone for a longer Tier 1. He also was getting pushed back a bit and did lose some of his generators. But this Techmarine does have Bionics, so if those Hormigons choose to swarm him, they are kind of in trouble. But they actually choose not to swarm him. They actually walk right past him, and they are going for the Hormigons instead. Or the Hormigons are going for the Tactical Marines, rather. Now, the Techmarine used Bionics, but once Bionics is on cooldown, he's just a ranged hero, and he doesn't actually do that much damage in melee. So I think he is actually kind of going to lose to the warriors. I wonder if we'll see an axe. That is something that could be quite good in this situation, with Destoffel going for so much melee. Since he's gone for a double Hormigon Brood instead of a double Termagant Brood. Compared to the double Termagants, gives you more power to push forward, but less ability to control and very, very little range fire. So a very low range DPS build coming out of Destoffel, since is literally his only ranged unit are these Termagants. They actually don't even have their crippling poison, so they're doing about like 3 or 4 damage per model, which is I just know they have very, very poor damage to start out. There we go with a grenade. Razberg nicely using those grenades as a melee counter. Now, using a grenade as a melee counter, especially compared to the shotgun, is high risk, high reward, because you can potentially get a lot of model kills, but at the same time, if your opponent actually reacts to it and gets out of the way, you could also potentially get nothing. So there are advantages and disadvantages to it. Eldar players tend to do it more because they don't have the shotgun option, and they have the grenade option very conveniently. But for Space Marine players, you don't see it as often because you have the shotguns, which although don't have the added, the potential payoff that the grenades have, they are much, much more reliable. Extremely reliable and extremely effective in that sense as well. Razberg only with the one shotgun though, and he has actually been getting pushed back a bit, so I think he might want to consider getting a second shotgun. I feel like maybe he could have used a second shotgun. As it is though, we have a Dreadnought coming out from Razberg, as well as a Tyrant Guard for Destoffel. I think the Dreadnought is the superior walker in this case. It's tough to say which one will win head-to-head, in part because this Tyrant Guard has super heavy infantry armor. That being said, the super heavy infantry armor means that if the Tyrant Guard and the Dreadnought get in a head-to-head fight, the Dreadnought will only be taking half damage from the Tyrant Guard because it has vehicle armor, while the Tyrant Guard will actually be taking full damage from the Dreadnought because it has super heavy infantry armor. But the Tyrant Guard also has quite a bigger health pool. Now, we saw one of the advantages of this Hormigaunt build is that it definitely gives Destoffel a lot of retreat killing power, especially now he's upgraded to both Adrenal Glands, giving them a damage buff, as well as upgrading to have, I believe it's the Endless Swarm upgrade that gives them an extra 2 models for no additional population. And I actually think this is really a really smart upgrade. Getting that Melt-A-Gun, because the Melt-A-Gun is going to do bonus damage to the Tyrant Guard, and it's actually still going to damage it even while it's in this shield wall mode. And I think he's very smartly switching targets to the Warrior Brood, because they are not going to win against this Dreadnought. Even though they can do damage to it, they are still not going to win against it. Scout Sergeant gets flesh took, and now he's going to start taking damage for the whole squad. And it looks like the Tyrant Guard is actually just about to get out of there. I think the Tyrant Guard will get out of there, and I think Razberg should not chase, because he might be walking into this Venom Brood squad. Instead, he should turn around. Yeah, I was going to say go for the Lictor Alpha. I think he should have gone for the Lictor Alpha earlier, because if he had gone for him earlier, he probably could have gotten basically an incapacitate or a wipe on that Lictor Alpha. We do now see the Techmarine with the Axe of the Mechanicum, which I think is a pretty good choice, given that he's often finding himself in melee with a lot of these squads. If he can use Bionics, it can be very effective against the Hormigaunts. He might also want to get the Refractor Field. It can make the Techmarine pretty beastly in melee. And we still have this Termagant Brood still with basically no Toxin Sacs, which I think it's curious. It's a curious choice by Destoffel. And, I mean, although he's choosing not to emphasize the Termagants, I feel like maybe he could still choose to get the Toxin Sacs, especially now that we have the Techmarine with the Axe of the Mechanicum, because he's going to be going in for melee rather than shooting at range. So if he actually gets the Toxin Sacs, uses it on the Techmarine, he would actually be really rendering the Techmarine useless in an engagement, as opposed to it wouldn't actually matter that much if the Techmarine had gotten snared with his bolter. In fact, there would not even be a target in particular that Destoffel would want to snare when the Techmarine has a bolter, which might be part of the reason that Destoffel chose not to get it. I have no idea why those scouts over there closing in for melee against all these units, but that was a very nice Bionics. I think the Warriors are in a ton of trouble, but so are a lot of Razberg squads. And now that Razberg has gotten rid of the Warriors, he needs to tie up the Venom Brood so that they can stop shooting at this Dreadnought. And the Dreadnought itself needs to go for the Lictor Alpha, because that Lictor Alpha is nearly dead. But the Lictor Alpha does manage to infiltrate just in time. And, ooh, I mean, that's a nice... I think that was another Bionics. And he's actually going to kill the Venom Brood, which is going to be really bad for Destoffel, because now Destoffel doesn't have as much of an answer to that Dreadnought. And let's actually look at the chunks of damage being taken out of this Tyrant Guard's health by that Techmarine axe. That's actually quite beautiful. And I actually don't know why this Techmarine is going forward, because it's about to walk into a Dreadnought. If it walks in, if it keeps going, it can actually, I think, win against the Techmarine. Techmarine might want, oh, but this is actually, no, that's going to be a dead Tyrant Guard. So poorly called on that engagement by Destoffel to extend his Tyrant Guard up that far. I'm not sure why he did that. Again, the Tyrant Guard, because it has super heavy infantry armor, it is vulnerable to a whole different set of things than a vehicle would be. And there we saw the Tyrant Guard pretty much countered by the Axe of the Mechanicum, which you could not do against any other walker or any other, yeah, pretty much any other walker. So that is part of the unique disadvantage of the Tyrant Guard, because it has super heavy infantry armor rather than vehicle armor. Techmarine now in a little bit of trouble, I think, going to be chased down. He used Bionics, but he still got knocked down by the Warriors, and I think he will get out of there alive. And overall, I'd say Razberg in the stronger position as far as army composition. He's also winning on VPs. And both players going to Tier 3, in fact. We might see a Venerable Dreadnought out of Razberg, and I actually think that would be a pretty good choice. Most likely, depending on... Well, I think in general it would actually be a really good choice, since Destoffel will most likely be going for some kind of Carnifex or Swarmlord, and the Venerable Dreadnought, especially backed up by another Dreadnought and a ranged Dreadnought that's now level 2, could actually be very, very good against the traditional Tyranid Tier 3 of spamming those Carnifexes or even getting that Swarmlord. Meanwhile, Razberg, he still has all of his scouts. I think this Devastator might be in a little bit of trouble. Oh no. Alright, the Devastators do get out of there. Meanwhile, this Techmarine actually doing very, very well at level 5. And they actually just straight up go for the Scout Squad. Scout Squad, yeah, they need to back up, or they need to just retreat to try to bait those Hormagaunts into the Techmarine and the Dreadnought. And that's a Hormagaunt squad down. So Destoffel loses a Hormagaunt squad. Ultimately, probably not that big of a deal, though, since what I often say is that when Tyranid players are sometimes content to just let their Tier 1 squads die, because they can just clear their population and their upkeep to start bringing out that train of Tier 3 units. Now, one of the things that I don't like about what's going on right now for Razberg is that he has neither of the side power points. So Destoffel is getting more of a power income. He's been getting more of a power income, and I feel like Destoffel should be denying this. He should be capturing those side VPs. Instead, he appears to be using all of his scouts for fighting in the middle, and he should be sending some of his scouts to the side to actually capture those points. Instead, he's actually got scouts in the middle that aren't that great as fighters, that I feel like should really be on the side. And he chose to get Terminators, which I think that's a little questionable. Certainly going to be very, very powerful against the Termagants. The Hormagaunts, as long as they can keep the Hormagaunts out of range. And pretty good against the Warriors, too. Not so good against the Tyranid super units, though. And again, I feel like we need to see scouts going off to the side to capture those side VPs. I think Razberg has... I mean, at this point in the game, it doesn't actually matter that much, but I feel like in the grand scheme of the game, I think Razberg has given Destoffel too many resources by doing that. And it's interesting to see. He's gotten Terminators. I feel like Terminators weren't that great of a choice. They can still work. They're okay, but I actually feel like the Venerable would have been the better choice in this. And that's interesting, because usually the Venerable is actually a very situational choice, because it's a Walker coming out in Tier 3 that's usually getting countered by a lot of Tier 3 stuff, like tanks. In this case, I think since Razberg kept his original Dreadnought alive, since the Tyranid Tier 3 actually in a lot of ways just resembles a lot of... Since it's mostly a bunch of walkers, it kind of resembles almost the tier 2s of most other races. But we do have that Swarmlord out on the field, and I actually feel like this regular Dreadnought is kind of going to be at the mercy of this Swarmlord. when the Swarm Lord would not really be able to deal that well with the combination of this Dreadnought and a Venerable. Instead, we have these Terminators, and he also chose to get the Heavy Flamer on them, which, I mean, is really good against the Tier 1 Tyranid squads, but, I mean, he's already wiped one of them, and I think at this point in the game, those Tier 1 squads are not what he's going to have to be worrying about. He's going to have to be worrying about this Swarm Lord, for which he, at present, I actually feel like he does not have adequate answers. He pretty much has the Dreadnought, and he can also force melee with the Terminators, but that's actually a little risky. He could also, well, he can't even get a las cannon because he has the advanced targeting on his... He chose to get Vengeance rounds on his Devastator. So he's actually now in a very, very tough position. His Dreadnought is being chased down by the Swarm Lord. He should actually start force meleeing with the Terminators and start baiting the... Well, not even baiting, since he's stopped to turn and fight. Again, he needs to force melee with the Terminators, because head-to-head, a ranged Dreadnought, a ranged Space Marine Dreadnought will absolutely lose to this Swarm Lord. And the Vengeance rounds from this Devastator are definitely not going to be enough. And I think we're actually going to see this multi-melted Dreadnought go down. And he tried to support it with repairs, but unfortunately it just wasn't enough. And also, I mean, this was also a huge mistake, not having the Terminators force melee that Swarm Lord, because the Swarm Lord's actually now pretty low on health. If he had force meleeed, I'm not sure if he would have been able to save the Dreadnought, but he probably would have been able to at least have the Swarm Lord already dead right now. As it is, he might still kill the Swarm Lord, but the problem is actually that the Swarm Lord is going to run away from the Terminators because it's faster than the Terminators. So, ooh. Now, Razberg has a huge VP lead. Oh, and that's another problem with getting these Terminators. They are going to get absolutely murdered by these Gene Stealers. Actually, the Gene Stealers are very low on health, so the Gene Stealers may not be able to stay in here, but nevertheless, I mean, the Terminators are actually losing a ton of health. So I actually really, really don't like the choices that that Razberg made in this match. He's going to lose the Terminators. He's going to lose the Terminators. Ouch. So yeah, I don't like the choices that Razberg made. And it's actually very close now with Razberg actually still with 372 VPs, but I think Destoffel in a very strong position now, having kept his Swarm Lord alive, wiping out Terminators and getting, and as well as that multi-melted Dreadnought. Unfortunately, Destoffel very, very unwisely overextending his Swarm Lord, and now he is going to lose that Swarm Lord as well, I think. Just needs a one cannon shot from the Predator. Unfortunately, the Predator is actually getting overwhelmed, and the Predator might go down as well. Oh, man. I don't know what happened there, but Swarm Lord dead, Predator dead, and I mean, they took relatively even losses, and they're actually now all back to just infantry squads. Razberg loses a scout squad. I think Razberg, kind of on the shorter end of this, also going to lose this scout. So now down to one scout squad. Razberg now with also a ridiculous surplus of red. Destoffel with a lot of red himself. And oh, Razberg losing his Techmarine as well. Razberg in a terrible situation. And he actually concedes. Even with a huge VP lead, he just has nothing left. Well, he has a little bit left. That concede might have even been premature, considering it's tough, actually. Destoffel still has resources, could actually pretty soon start working on a Carnifex. Razberg would have to wait a bit just to get his Techmarine back, or even just to get out like another scout squad. But yeah, I mean, just some of those choices, I really did not like some of the micro choices, and I kind of didn't like the choice of those Terminators, and then even the use of those Terminators could have been better. But anyway, hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.